Hi, I'm Danielle Mundle. I am a user experience researcher, and I'm here today to give you some tips and some ideas on how you can conduct user-centered research to positively impact your e-commerce business. So, a bit about myself. I got the requisite headshot that's at least 5 years old there. So, and I've phonetically spelled my name for you, and I think it's it's important, even if you've known me for a long time, or if you're a friend who I have not yet met, to get that name right, because it's kind of the elephant in the room. So, figured we could all practice. So, Mundle on 3. 1, 2, 3. Mundle. You got it. That's awesome. That's probably the most people who've ever said my name right. So as we learned from Leon's talk, and we saw in that video, our customers are so important to us. We know that they're the ones that are really powering our business, making purchases. And it's important to understand them and know what they're doing. But, do we really have an accurate picture of what that looks like? I think a lot of times it's so easy to make assumptions about what our customers are doing because, of course, we know our business. I mean, it's, our pet project a lot of times. And it's important, though, to really get an objective view on what's happening. And because we want to make a real impact. We don't want to just be, trying things and seeing if they stick to the wall. So it's important to be smart about the research that we do conduct. And I know that gathering data is easy. Maybe not as easy, we got the GDPR thing, but it's so easy to be able to say, hey, let's do a survey. Let's just see if people like this thing. Let's just ask them their opinions and see what we get. Let's just talk to some people, do some interviews. And if we don't have a plan and a goal in mind when we do that, it becomes very difficult to process all that data. How do we know that what we've collected is going to be useful and can be used in a way that's meaningful for our business? So I'm going to give a little bit of an intro on how research can impact and some tips on how to do that. So when I'm conducting research, oftentimes I try to think into the future. And many times you often do a post-mortem on a project. I wonder how that could go better for next time. But what I try to do is a pre-mortem. So how can I anticipate problems that may happen in the future? So I close my eyes and I think about the best possible outcome where all my stakeholders are happy. How did I get there? What information did I collect? What questions are these people answering? I'm not yet thinking about the solutions, though, and I know that can be very tempting to do. But I just start with that end result and work backward, and that helps me start in the right place to get where I need to be. Because a lot of times you can do what's called unnecessary research. And I've put together a short list here of things that you should probably not do when you're doing research. And I think the first two are ones that we can kind of come up with ourselves, but those last two bullets there, doing things that are actually important to users. I think a lot of times we think, oh, of course, our website needs an awesome new design. Let's do research. How can we, incorporate all this cool technology for our customers? But if they're not really people who are going to be using that or actually want it, it's going to be wasted effort. Same thing for the last bullet. If it's going to be so cool to learn about new technologies and implement them on your site because it's fun for your designers or your front-end people, it's going to be, fun for them but useless for your users. And it's going to be time and money that could have been used for something more meaningful. So I'm not going to convince you that you should do research or when to do it. But I'm going to talk about moments in your project and in your development life cycle where you may think to do research. And we have three main sections here. We have one for when you have to validate an idea, another topic for when you're researching competitors, and then ongoing research to make sure that your site is still that awesome site it was before you launched. So first, when we think about ideas and where they come from, it could be from anyone on your team. And no matter if it's coming from the owner of the company or the person you just hired, those ideas need to be validated. We want to make sure that the idea is something that we can actually use and will be helpful. But a lot of times, it's hard to know where to start. So when we use research here to validate our ideas, it tells us what we already know. So things that we learn and can use from there. And it can also tell us where the gaps are in our knowledge, so we can learn what we don't know and what we need to do further research on. So one easy way to do this that is very low impact is what I call literature research. And no, this doesn't really mean go to the library and pull out an encyclopedia, but there are a lot of examples that you could find online that maybe relate to your business. Maybe there's examples of that feature already out there that exists that you can learn from. And there may also be studies out there that people have written about in white papers or their blogs that tell how they're doing research and how they're improving their sites that you can learn from. And oftentimes we find little bits of pieces of information here and there, and unless we all collect them and put them in one place, it's hard to see the big picture and how they could help you. So there's obviously a lot of information out there, but we all live in this age of fake news. So it's important to keep in mind that you need to check your sources. Who's the person that's giving you this information? I know I've seen a ton of blogs that compare Magento to other e-commerce platforms. And the end result always changes based on the agency or the perspective of the person writing it. So know where your data is coming from. Along those lines, consider the bias that's there and the sample size. Maybe their research is only being done with 2 people. And how can you, extrapolate that to the general public? So keep these bits of information in mind when you're looking how to validate your new ideas. And I know when we have a new idea, it's so tempting to just get a bunch of people in a room and ask them if they love that idea. And so a focus group may be the first approach that you would take. And I wanted to just take a minute and not to, talk bad about the focus groups, because I think there's a time and place, and with rigor, it's a great method. But a lot of times, there's a lot of bias that comes in from focus groups. You have a bunch of different people that all have this, their own personalities, and everyone's trying to put forth a good representation of themselves. A lot of times in research, I find that people are very apt to just say things that the researcher wants to hear. They want you to have a good result from your study, so they're going to say something that they think might help you. Or you may have someone in that group that's a really strong voice, and they tend to dominate the conversation. And they could influence other people in that room as well. So it's important to understand that these things can happen when you're asking a lot of people the same question. And of course, you always get those people that somehow make it in past the screener that are just there to sit there, say a few words, and make a quick buck. And last, I find in research that people are generally not that great at predicting their future behavior. I mean, think about those times at the doctor's office when they ask you how many times a week you work out, or whether you're eating healthy. It's easy to just say, oh, of course, yeah, I'm gonna do this, or my New Year's resolution is to do all these things, and of course we believe we're going to actually achieve those. But we can't count on people to be honest with themselves a lot of times. And so there are ways to get at that data without flatly asking people a direct question. And so in order to be able to do that, it's best to be strategic. And I know it might sound a little bit shady asking people questions that aren't exactly what you want to know, but it's a way to sort of triangulate and get to that point of data without being leading and revealing what you really want to know from your person that you're speaking to. So a lot of times what you could do if you're, say, validating a feature is ask people what their pain points are. See if they're going to mention pain points that your idea could possibly solve. Ask them what kind of third-party software they're using, or maybe talk about some workarounds for them to do what they need to do that is not already there. And you could also think about, what are some of the points in your customer journey that are just neutral? They're not bad, but how can you make those great? So those are some ways to get at that information to validate that, hey, I think this feature would be a great idea, without asking people if they think it's going to be, because of course, people want that feature. They don't want to miss out on it. They're going to tell you they want it. So that's a way to get strategic. And one other thing that's important when you're speaking with people and asking them questions about anything in research, and not only a new idea, is to take some time and make them feel comfortable, build some rapport. It's really, you want to just maximize your time, jump into all those questions, and find out what you're looking to know. But unless people feel comfortable with you, they're not going to always give their honest opinions. So what I like to do when I start speaking with someone is ask them about their role at their company. Get them talking about what they do and what their company does. It's a way for them to feel comfortable speaking with you, and it can provide you with some contextual information about their background as well. Moving on to competitor research. Now I know it's obvious that you probably shouldn't just blindly copy whatever your competitors are doing, but it's also hard to understand whether it's just sort of a fluff thing they're doing for marketing, or whether they're really on like the cusp of this paradigm shift in your industry. So a lot of times it's very simple to make a list of features, kind of compare yourself to your competitors, and get a high-level view of what's going on. But there are other tactics that you can try as well. I know we always wish that we had access to our competitors' research. I think that's one of the things that would really help. But why not just conduct it yourself? A lot of software out there lets you conduct unmoderated remote usability tests. So you can just plug in any website that you want and write some tasks and have people perform them on their own time, and you get that data back. So why not have your site and a competitor's site and have them perform some of the same tasks? There's a couple of software that I've listed here that allow you to reach out to people. It's sort of like a full service type thing. But it's important to remember that you want to be objective with your research. After all, research is something that should have some kind of scientific rigor, right? And it's so easy to just cherry pick and make sure that people are doing tasks that'll make your site look better than your competitors. So try to make sure that you have tasks that are going to be representative of A, what really happens online, and B, what would be something that you're really going to look at from an objective point of view, as if you didn't work for your company and have that have that loyalty. And one way to do this is to obscure the brands. And you can quickly use software to do this, to create a mock-up. There's a great program called Balsamic with a Q at the end. And that can allow you to just make a quick prototype of what those sites look like if it's not feasible to test an actual live version of the sites. And finally, it's important to read between the lines of your research. A lot of times, branding does kind of obscure what people might say. I know I had a project one time where I was comparing two different instruction manuals from a very well-known and loved brand. And people said, of course, it's great, both of them are fine in the survey, which followed the tasks. And when I was observing the sessions, I knew that there had to be a difference there. I could feel it. I knew that there was. And I went back, and instead of looking only at the survey data, I considered what people were saying during the tasks. How many times did they say, wait a minute, where am I? Or, a lot of times they had negative things that they were saying versus positive that they themselves didn't capture in that survey at the end. So it's important to kind of think about, all right, what does this really mean? What really happened here? And think about other ways that you can measure satisfaction instead of maybe some of the measures that you're already doing. Finally, for ongoing research, you know, a lot of times research happens before a site goes live, and that's great because you want to put your best foot forward. But e-commerce does not exist in a vacuum, right? It's always changing. There's always new trends, and people are always changing as humans are. So how can we make sure that our site is still performing at an optimum level as we go forward? So a lot of times we do have KPIs, and that's what we're doing to measure our success. But how can we change those KPIs into a hypothesis? How can we then take that hypothesis and validate it or refute it by doing research? A lot of times it's easy to just assume, okay, well, if we want to reduce our abandoned carts, then obviously the solution is to send more follow-up emails. But it's important to think critically. What other things could be a possible reason for this? And test some of those things out and see if you can make an impact. A lot of times those assumptions do get the best of us. So here's a good place where research can really help out. Another thing that we're always looking for ongoing to judge how our online sites are doing is looking at analytics. And there are a lot of great tools out there, and they do tell you a lot of information about what's going on, the paths people are taking, what people are clicking on. But analytics are really only telling you half the story. They're telling you what happens on your site, but they're not really telling you why. Why are people clicking here? Why are they taking that path? Are they confused? Do people know exactly why they're clicking on something? And that's an important part to fill in your research. Those numbers are great and they're very compelling, but also are people's stories about their context. So we may see patterns, but it's important to incorporate perhaps some qualitative research to supplement that quantitative research that your analytics are giving you. So perhaps some interviews with people. You can implement Hotjar on your site, and if people like, they can give their email, and that's a great way to get in touch with your customers and follow up with them with some questions. And a lot of times, just because something's clickable on your website, doesn't mean people aren't clicking on it. So a lot of times we may have pictures or other titles that may be compelling, and maybe people are clicking on them. But if they're not really triggering an event, how can we be sure if that's happening or not? One way to do this is set up your Google Analytics to have a hotspot on that and see if people do click on it. A lot of other software also tracks cursor movement. Take a look at that too. It's important to take a look at those things instead of just the click paths and the percentages of what people are doing. So this can tell you another part of your story that a lot of times people can look over. So to sum up our takeaways here, it really seems impossible sometimes to think about whether or not we can do our own research. And I know that bias creeps in, and like we said, those pet projects are near and dear to our heart. And sometimes it does help to get a third party in there and giving you information, but a lot of times it's something that you can do yourself, as long as you put yourself in that right mindset, as long as you're approaching this with enough rigor and objectivity and curiosity about what's happening with your customers. And if you focus that research into a goal which can be measured and replicated and iterated on, it's going to help you understand the real story with your customers and give you that extra edge to really make an impact on your site. So to just provide a couple of resources, taking things a step forward, these are some great books that can tell you how to approach research yourself from that internal perspective, and these are some of my research idols that I do follow on Twitter. And if you want some further reading about user experience in general, or you know, How Humans Behave. These are really great books that I also recommend as well. So as a researcher, I love to hear stories, and I'd love to know how your research insights are going. So you can reach out to me via Twitter. I'd love to answer some questions now if there's time. But until then, go forth and do great research.